Good evening. Can our planning commissioners who are online hear us?
Yes,
Great.
I can hear you.
Well, we can hand it over to you then, Chair Graytrick, to take us from here.
Sounds good. Good evening, everyone. I would like to call the meeting to order and welcome you to the regular meeting of the Milwaukie Planning Commission. Gavel. Agendas and additional copies of staff reports are available on the city website at milwaukieoregon.gov. You may locate them by navigating to the community calendar where tonight's meeting page is posted. If you have not reviewed the agenda, please do so. It contains important information about the process. Now for the native lands acknowledgement. The city of Milwaukie respectfully acknowledges that our community is located on the ancestral homeland of the Clackamas people. In 1855, the surviving members of the Clackamas signed the Willamette Valley Treaty, also known as the Kalapuya Treaty, with the federal government in good faith. We offer our respect and gratitude to the indigenous people of this land and a moment of reflection. Now on to the minutes. There are no commission minutes for consideration this evening. Are there any informational items from staff?
No, there are not. Thank you.
Thank you. Now for the audience participation section, this is an opportunity to comment on items that are not on tonight's agenda. Does any audience member wish to comment on an item that is not on tonight's commission agenda?
No, there are no comments on that.
Thank you. On to our hearing items then. The next agenda item is the Type 3 application for a community service use to establish the existing house and property as the base of operation for a meditation group. This is under file number CSU 2025-002. The Type 3 application for 8835 Southeast 42nd Avenue is called to order. The applicant has the burden of proving that the application is consistent with the city's zoning and subdivision ordinance, comprehensive plan, and any applicable municipal code provision, and that the proposal conforms with the city's applicable criteria. I want to ask the city staff to cite the zoning ordinance sections or sections that the criteria can be found.
Thank you, Chair. The applicable sections are Milwaukie Municipal Code Section 19.301, Moderate Density Residential Zone, or R-MD, Chapter 19.700, Public Facility Improvements, Section 19.904, Community Service Uses, and Section 19.1006, Type 3 Review.
Thank you. To clarify conduct of the hearing, all testimony and evidence must be directed towards the applicant. The applicable substantive criteria. Failure to address a criteria or raise an issue with sufficient detail to allow the Planning Commission an adequate opportunity to respond to each issue precludes appeal to the City Council based on that issue. Failure to raise constitutional or other issues related to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient detail to allow a response precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Any party withstanding may appeal the decision of the Planning Commission to the City Council. Persons withstanding are those who submit comments or testify. If additional documents or evidence are provided by any party, the Commission may, if requested, allow a continuance or leave the record open to allow the parties a reasonable opportunity to respond. Any such continuance or extension shall be subject to the limitations of the 120-day rule, unless the continuance or extension is requested or agreed to by the applicant. On to conflicts of interest. Do any members of the Commission wish to abstain from this hearing? Hearing none. Does any member of the Commission wish to declare an actual or potential conflict of interest? Do any member, I'm sorry.
No.
Okay. Do any members of the Commission wish to report any ex parte contacts? Will any commissioner who has visited the site prior to this hearing please raise their hand? Did Did any commissioner who visited the site speak to anyone at the site or note anything different from what is indicated in the staff report for this application?
No.
No for me as well. Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the participation of any member of the Planning Commission? Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission to hear this matter? Hearing none, let's proceed to the staff report.
All right, thank you, Chair. Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Brett Kelver. I'm Senior Planner with the city, and I'll walk us through this application, set up the discussion. So this is a community service use application. Community service uses are essentially type of conditional use for certain uses that that may not be outright permitted in a zone, primarily like this happens a lot for our residential zones, but are able to be allowed with some discretionary review. So that's the format for our consideration tonight. So the site in question is a property in the Ardenwald Johnson Creek neighborhood, just adjacent to the Llewellyn neighborhood boundary. It's at the corner of 42nd Avenue and Roswell, and also has frontage on 41st Avenue. So it's a large property, kind of a double corner type of lot. Just about 3/4 of an acre. It's currently developed with a single house and a detached accessory structure, a barn structure. So the primary zoning in this area is the R-MD, or moderate density residential. The site here is shown in Hatching at its location. It is right across Roswell Street from a small area of small scale mixed use. That one site at I guess it's the southwest corner of 42nd Roswell is currently developed with the Roswell Market, so kind of a small convenience store type location. The property is on the city's list of historic resources. It's designated as a significant property. And the applicant has proposed some minor exterior alterations to the house as part of the project. Those are able to be reviewed without the need for any discretion. The historic resources part of the code is pretty clear about certain activities that are allowed, small changes. And so those aspects are being reviewed separately with the building permit for this. So just getting into the heart of the proposal, it's essentially to establish the site as kind of a base of operation for this meditation group. And they have outlined in their narrative kind of the general operating schedule that they have. It's a combination of in-person meditation sessions as well as some virtual sessions. They have a pretty regular schedule throughout the year with some periodic, more intensive sessions that involve a few additional in-person and virtual sessions, and then concluding with a more of a retreat style event. And that currently happens about twice a year. What they've explained with the current level of membership, they have, both some members who participate regularly, so, every week in some of those events, and then some other folks who are a little more occasional. And I would encourage, the applicant will have an opportunity to elaborate or give more detail about that. There is some interest in over time. Their hope is that with this new base of operation that they may attract some new members and have occasion to kind of increase some of the attendance, and would like the opportunity to potentially expand a little bit the number of more intensive sessions that they would do as well. I think there are some limitations, I think naturally, and again, the applicants can speak to this in terms of the group's energy and capacity and the size of the lot as well. But I think what we wanted to be able to consider as part of this review was to establish some sense of scale of the level of use, so that we could, if possible, not necessarily have to micromanage the site in terms of changing from one day of the week to another day of the week with some of the meetings, or to allow for a little bit of kind of anticipated expansion or growth. And I think the applicant has kind of framed what their hope or expectation is with respect to what the current site and the house as it is right now would allow in terms of some of the participation levels for in particular, I think both the regular sessions, but also the more intense sessions. And then with some hoped for renovation of the barn structure, a little bit of increase in capacity. And I think we were hoping that that would kind of set the parameters of understanding for what would be happening on the site over time. Throughout this, the intent is to have the house serve as a residence for someone. And so initially, someone would be living at the house, and the house itself would be kind of the center of activity. I think the hope is over time, with some renovations to the barn, that the barn would also be part of the operation, that some of the focus of the operation would shift to the barn. The applicant can explain a little bit more about that, and if you all have questions, we can get into that as well. So that's the overall framework for the proposed use. And I think for consideration, the standard framework for review of and approval of community surface uses involves, I think the key ones here are, I've listed the 5 of them, numbers 3 and 5, essentially just understanding what the hours and levels of operation will be, and considering whether the location and the site are appropriate for what's being proposed. And essentially with this review, staff's assessment and feeling about it was that it was approvable as presented. We didn't think there was even a need for any conditions. It's the activity itself obviously is a quiet one, and the levels of attendance to us seem to be low enough to not warrant greater concern. We have received some additional comment about that, and I'm sure we'll hear some testimony, and so that can be a point of some consideration and discussion as well. With that in mind, wrapping up, I think the options that you have for decision-making are you can approve the application as it's been presented with the findings that we provided in the staff report. If you feel that there should be some modifications, either to the findings or the addition of some conditions, we can aim to add those if needed, as long as we capture them for the record. If there's a feeling there's a need for additional information or discussion, continuing the hearing is an option. The 120-day clock for this application would let us get to the end of August if needed. And additionally, always an option is to deny the application. If you were to do that, we would need to make some adjustments to the findings with that in mind. So with that, I would just restate that the staff recommendation is to approve the request as presented, and I'm open to any questions that you might have for now.
Thank you very much for that explanation. Let me just go back to, are there any clarifying questions for staff?
Chair Graytrick, I have some questions.
Please.
Yeah, thank you, if I may. Brett, I was kind of curious with the kind of discussion about potential future changes to the barn structure. If and when those changes were to ever occur, structural improvements, footprint changes, those kinds of things, how would that be handled? I kind of feels a little bit of a hypothetical that's peppered in here, and I'm just wondering, like, what would be the mechanisms, if any, that would happen through Planning Commission or Type 2 at that point?
Are you referring to the question of whether there would be historic resource review or more with the CSU aspect?
Or with the CSU aspect? Yeah, sorry if that question's not totally well formulated. I guess I'm curious, you know, some of the testimony we've received has, I think, raised a question about potential future impacts that may or may not happen if growth were to occur. We don't know if growth is going to occur, but I'm curious, it sounds like if growth were to occur, there would need to be some modifications to the barn itself. And would those be handled through a Type 2 application? Would they just be straight through building code? Would they be a new Type 3? And you might not know, because maybe this whole thing is too speculative.
Oh, I do love to speculate, but no, I think I can address those questions. So The answer to what kind of review might be needed does depend a little bit. With respect to the historic aspect of the property, I think the Historic Resources Code does, like I mentioned before, it provides some activities, it lists some activities that are pretty clearly exempt from needing further review. It also identifies kind of a minor alteration category, which is, like I said, what the review that the current proposed changes, adding a handrail, changing out a window, that those are being handled as a minor alteration. If there was something more extensive, like radically changing doors and windows, things that don't fall into the minor category, then that would need to be reviewed on the historical resource aspect through a type 3 review coming to the Planning Commission. With respect to the activity itself, what the hope was of staff was taking what the applicant had presented, which is both current levels of membership and activity with their own projected hope of what, based on their understanding of the site and the facilities on the site, what they might be able to do with it, where they might expand to, and allow that to serve as, in a way, kind of the actual approved community service uses with that projected number in mind, so that there would not necessarily be a need to come back for a Planning Commission level review for the community service use, because there would have been some consideration already and some understanding that there is flexibility and room for the group to grow from what it currently is to what it understands it might be able to be at that site. And that beyond that point, there would be a need for either a minor or a major modification to the community service use. So for example, if the suggestion is, we could see maybe handling 30 participants in our regular events, whether it's in person, 2 nights a week meditation session, or 30 participants at a more intensive retreat. And again, the applicant can correct me or further explain. The idea would be that's what's understood, that the group might grow from 8 to 10 right now, that regular level of participation, up to 30, and that as long as it didn't go beyond that number, that we would expect that that's what was reviewed, approved, and understood to be the use. But that if we heard that there were 45 regular participants, for example, then we would need to have some kind of revisiting of that. So does that explain?
I think that's helpful to kind of better understand kind of the color of how that would.
Okay.
Another question I had when looking at the approval criteria is Milwaukie Municipal Code subsection 19904(8)B, which requires that when located in or adjacent to a residential zone, access should be located on a collector street, if practicable. I noticed in my own site visit that it seems like some of the primary access is the U-shaped driveway located on 41st, although of course there is still a front door to the building on 42nd. I don't see anything proposed about changing that primary access, so I'm assuming that was kind of determined to not be practicable.
About changing the access from Roswell to
the vehicle access, or changing, from 41st to either Roswell or maybe the driveway is on.
There are three driveways. I mean, there's access from each one of the frontages.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. And then can you clarify, because I don't believe I saw it in the findings of approval or in the application, but the 75 bus line runs fairly close and is frequent service. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Down Johnson Creek and 32nd. Okay, great. I think that's it for now.
Are there any questions for staff? Any additional questions from folks?
I have one, Chair.
Yes, please.
How do or will the neighborhood hubs designation play into this? Does that play into this at all?
I'm going to ask for help on that. I'm not as familiar with the neighborhood hubs project.
At this point, the neighborhood hub that's been identified there is right across the street, the small scale mixed use zone. So it's those 2 lots that that encompass the Roswell Market and then the one directly adjacent. So the neighborhood hub itself was identified as very site-specific as those two properties. So to the extent that, I mean, the neighborhood hub itself, the zoning wasn't, expanded beyond that existing convenience store location. So I suppose you could imagine a relationship between, any kind of hub-like activity there with what might be happening at the meditation center, but the hub itself doesn't expand, to the meditation center site itself.
Okay.
I have a couple questions for staff. First, I just want to clarify, and you may have already semi-answered this, but I just want to make it very clear. In terms of future exterior alteration to the barn, technically, I believe the house is the historic resource. It's not very clear to me if the barn is included as a historic resource. So if there were in the future more intensive changes proposed, say, to the barn, would it still need to go through the historic resource review for alterations if they were more than minor alterations?
Right, that question is still being sorted out. I think the initial indication that we gave to the applicant when we were having pre-application conversations was that based on the designation shown on our current zoning map, it was capturing the property is composed of two tax lots. One tax lot captures the house and the other has the barn on it. And the way our map shows, it was just showing a historic designation on the tax lot that has the house. So our initial information to the applicant was that it appeared that only the house was included in the historic designation. In further preparation for the hearing, and we looked more closely at the designation that happened in 1992, and there's some information that indicates that the barn was also considered. So we have not finalized an understanding yet of if the designation was intended to include both the barn and the house, why our map is showing just one of the two tax lots with the designation. So it's not 100% clear yet, and we're working on sorting that out, and we're in communication with the applicant about that as well. If the conclusion was that the barn should be included in the designation, then it would be subject to the same consideration as proposed modifications to the house. That is, there's some exempt allowances, some that would be considered minor, and some that would require major review by the Planning Commission.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. I think that is an important question that I have in general, but it sounds as though it doesn't necessarily weigh heavily on decisions being made tonight, since it's talking about future actions, but it is something I would like to see clarified. One thing I'd like to also clarify, there will only be one person, or perhaps a couple people, but there would only be like one or two people living in the house, and it would not have additional residents. That's not proposed, correct?
That one, I think we'll ask the applicant team to clarify for you. It's just been discussed as the house serving as a primary residence. It's not clear how many people that might mean, or whether there should be, I guess there's a question about whether there should be any restriction on that as well, in terms of, just like with any house, how many people are allowed to live there. Seems like it has a little bit more to do with the number of bedrooms and bathrooms than.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I guess I'm not really so concerned with the total number of peoples. It seems like we might have some gray area here where we're crossing over to our short-term rental issue if we have folks staying overnight. If it starts being a larger number of people and they're actually staying multiple nights, how does that interact with some of our requirements that we put on our short-term rentals? Or does it apply at all? Because they're staying overnight, but they're not renting the whole facility. They are staying at the facility with folks who live there. And so I was just curious if there is any overlap with those sorts of restrictions or anything we should be considering.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think And again, we may have to tag team a little bit with the applicant team to address this one. So if I can keep a foot in the door on that. I think that the short-term rental aspect of things is about actual rental of a space, whether it's rental of a whole house or rental of a room, for stays less than 30 days. That wouldn't apply if it's my house and I have friends or people that I associate with that I allow to stay there. I guess the distinction would be, are they being charged, quote, rent to stay there? So I guess with the nature of this operation, I'm not totally clear about what kind of business aspects there are to it, but the approach that I had going into it, that may need to be corrected, I guess, is just that, at least initially, that my impression was that the person living in the house had some association or would have some association with the group. Again, the applicant team can clarify. I'm not sure it's totally critical to this, but the idea is that there was some, or understand was there was some relationship, and that that party who's living in the house as a primary residence is open and agreeable to the site also being used for the meditation activities. So I guess I wasn't looking at it necessarily as a rental situation so much as a kind of a duplication or an extension of what sounds like is already happening in another part of town with the group. There is someone, and again, the applicant can explain more of this, but someone who's involved in the group offers their house as the site for their friends or other members of the group to come and hold the meditation sessions. And so with that in mind, I wasn't really considering that. Not sure it qualifies as a short-term rental. I think the question about short-term rental might be more germane with what I understand about the future proposed use, which was if the barn is improved in a way that it becomes more an active part of the meditation activities, and the house were to also be used for some people to stay overnight as part of the intensive groups, and the person living in the house as its primary residence maybe didn't have a real connection with the group and then was renting, like literally charging the group for people unrelated to them to stay in that space, then maybe we would have a look at it in a short-term rental kind of way. But I hadn't delved into it that much or thought about that much of the nuance. And again, maybe with a little bit more explanation from the applicant team, we can come back to this and discuss it further if needed.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. I think I do a couple of these questions do bleed over to the applicant, so I will hold for the time being. Let me turn back. Let's see. Are there any other clarifying questions for staff? Okay. Have we received any correspondence on this matter other than those items included in the meeting packet?
We have. The middle of last week, after the packet was published, we did get a comment that I forwarded on to the Planning Commission and the applicant team. It was from Chris and Anna, neighbors of the current base of operation for the group on Floss Street. They were in support. And then just before the hearing tonight, we did receive a comment from Alexandra Howard, who I believe is here with us tonight and may present some testimony as well. It raised a number of concerns and questions about the description of the use and whether all potential impacts had been considered. So that was forwarded on to the Planning Commission as well with physical copies tonight and provided to the applicant as well. But those are the two additional comments that we've received since the packet was produced.
Thank you. Would the applicant or their representatives or a representative for the applicant like to comment?
Thanks a lot. I hope that we can provide some answers to some of the items that you're asking. My name is Andrew Mason, and I am a resident of the Ardenwald Johnson Creek neighborhood, and the current owner of the former Mason Farm and current Mason Farm house property.
I'm Jane Lawson. I'm the moderator of the Ringer Moss group, which means I'm kind of an administrator and in charge of governance and those sorts of things. And I've been the moderator since 2019.
So thank you for the hearing tonight and for your service as volunteers, if I understand that correctly, to make sure that our city shows up the way that it wants to show up. I appreciate it. So there's other things that we could all be doing on a Tuesday evening. And this is a good one. I think that I will attempt to answer some of the questions. I think some of it can help just by way of history. Our group has been meeting for decades and kind of going between people's houses. And during the pandemic, we even gathered at Mount Tabor Park for a little while so that we could be outside underneath the picnic area. In 2018, I was formally named as a teacher. And so it provided an opportunity for us to formalize in a way that we hadn't. And in doing that, we thought, okay, we can't find public spaces to convene as a group when the pandemic came around. And so can we find another spot? And we ended up purchasing the house on 3525 Southeast Floss Street. Before we did that, we called the planning group here and said, is this something that we can do? The question, frankly, we're kind of rule followers, and they said, the basic answer was like, look, if you own the house and people are willingly inviting you in, fine. And we mostly described it as if you were holding a book group or something like that. And I think largely that's how we've functioned for the last 5 years. I think that we may be viewed as a book group on steroids. And I think that part of the challenge in both framing our application and in understanding what we're doing is to understand at what point are the steroids too much? At what point does the community service use kick in? And a year ago now, or 11 months, I called the planning commission or the planning department again and said, so we're trying to figure out, can we build in the back of this house on Floss Street where the lot is big enough? What are the issues? What should we be concerned about? And the response was largely the same then that we had gotten before, was that if you're holding a book group, fine. But at some point, if it's a regular set of sessions, if you start to advertise for what you're doing, then we are going to want to think of that in a different way. And so that's what led us to say, okay, is this the right place for that? And it didn't feel like the right place in terms of what it would require to expand the size of a building if we were to get any bigger than the 8 or 10 people that we have right now, and where people might park cars and what have you. And so we started poking around and seeing if there was some place nearby, and that's how we came to this property through a series of the pre-application process. We had a number of conversations that were very helpful to figure out, would we be conforming or not conforming? But that's what led us to have, to describe as best as we could, kind of lower end thresholds of use, which we currently have, and to really try and say, here's maximum end thresholds of use, stipulating very specifically, 20 days, no more than 20 days of residential stuff. And then we're meeting all year round, twice a week at very specific times. And then during these 6-week periods, we double that. We double so we meet 4 times a week. All of those times are when Ardenwald School is not in session. And so, you think about it just made sense. Like, you've got a school there and you've got the kind of traffic that comes up and down that street. It's 2 blocks away. And so when that's really jammed in the middle of the day, it's not when we would have people coming and going on Sunday morning, early in the morning, or when we're coming in the evening at dinner time. So that seemed to make some sense. Where it was located, where there's already stuff happening in terms of the convenience store that's there and on 42nd seemed to make sense as just in terms of, the busyness. I don't have the specific planning terms here. My apologies for that. But that was what we were trying to work out, and to allow a place for potential growth. Now, At Floss Street, we have folks who've lived there the entirety of the time that we've been there. It was one gentleman there for 2 years, and there's a couple that's living there now. They both practice with us. That's our term for, if you're a regular meditator, you're practicing. And so we're there at the pleasure of the individuals who are living there, and that's what we would expect to continue at the Mason Farm property for until such time as we were able to develop the barn. And to develop the barn as a standalone meditation place, at which point then we would just likely just rent out the house. So have a residence there, and it would be completely unrelated. The design would be designed to have it unrelated to what's happening in the barn. We don't know because we want to make sure that the use is acceptable before we invest fully in what happens with the development of the property. So there's a little bit of cart and horse stuff here with that. But that's why we were trying to describe as best as we could. I will say that we're very, we welcome and tried to stipulate as clearly as we could what upper thresholds would be for participation, both in terms of traffic and people involved. It's a small and relational kind of activity. We don't expect to have really the capacity to serve more than 30 people at any given time. And I'll just say that in my experience, where I have regularly participated with a group in California, where I've gotten the bulk of my training, and it has a Zen center that can host 30 people, they're way more often on their Wednesday evenings serving 4 and 6 people. And that's kind of what our experience has been. I think it'll be different here because we're in an urban area, they're in a rural area, so it's harder to access there than it is here, but it's just, I don't know what to anticipate. I certainly want to attempt to be as transparent as I can about what we expect that to be. That's where we came from, and so and how we got here in terms of saying, okay, so is this something that would work with the future? So the idea would be for us to continue just the way we are at Floss Street on 42nd Avenue for, 2 to 3 years, the time that it would take to redevelop the barn, have someone then rent the house, and we would operate exclusively out of the barn. We anticipate, we've been in conversation about what that would look like to come and produce a design in a way that honors the heritage that's there, the important agricultural history of the neighborhood, honor what's happening with the neighbors. I appreciate that Brett said that the folks next door to us now wrote a letter of support. And I hope you got to read it, because our intent is to be good neighbors. We've met multiple people who were at close to us at the new site there, and we've spoken, and the folks who we were living next door to on Floss Street felt good about, who we were, and that's part of what, we're of the place. And I won't preach on that, but being grounded in the community that we're in really matters. We felt very, very welcomed. It's been great. So I won't prattle on, but the question about the number of residents that the chair was asking, it would be a family. It's a 3-bedroom house. And I guess you weren't asking specifically the number you said, but anyway, it would be a standard rental, and certainly not a short-term rental. That's not what we're interested in doing. So are there other specific questions that I should address, or we should tag team addressing?
Yeah, so are there any commissioners who have any questions for the applicants?
I have a quick question. Thank you for giving us more information. I really appreciate that. I wanted to follow up on a previous question about the short-term rental. When you're having and how that could potentially fit, are people being charged for the retreats to participate in the retreat, as far as if lodging is included in that part of the fee to participate?
Yeah, people are being charged. I mean, so we're formulating as a nonprofit. We could consider it a donation if we wanted to consider it a donation. It's not like so food is included, lodging is included. And we just did one of these on Floss Street, 3 weeks ago, something like that, for five days. And of the 8 people that were there participating, 2 had no ability to pay and they did not. So it's, I mean, I think the equivalent is a lot like church, honestly. I mean, it's what that experience is. I guess people aren't sleeping over at church, but that's sort of the nature of meditation, and it makes it less obnoxious to those who are around us because we get up really early and sometimes we stay sitting is the euphemism for meditation, but until late at night.
Thank you for that. And so then my follow-up question is, how does that, for us, for staff, would that constitute being considered a short-term rental then if they're receiving a fee for staying as part of participation in the retreat?
Just to stay true to the process, I'll note that question and I'll address that when I get a chance to say more.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Are there any other members of the commission who would like to ask questions?
I'd just like to address your concern about the short-term rental. I've attended similar retreats at other Zen centers, and there's always a fee, which includes food, money for the teacher, and I suppose, electricity, et cetera. But I've never thought that I'm a renter when I go to those retreats. I'm just going to these retreats and this is the fee, and this is fairly standard across other Zen centers, that there's a membership. If you're a member of the group, there's one fee, and if you're not a member, it's a little bit more. So the idea of renting never even occurred to me until I'm hearing it here, so. I hope that helps.
Yeah, I can understand that. The question is more a technicality from our perspective, since short-term rentals are one of the types of properties that we, review applications for. So I just wanted, from a clerical perspective, wanted to make sure that, we were considering the different components that may need to apply. So I can very much appreciate how it might not feel that way to you. So one question I had, just to follow up to something you had described for that future use, and I don't want to dwell on that too much, but I think I just, something kind of triggered a thought in my brain. So you're saying that in the future, the goal would be through renovations with the barn, that the residents would be, totally separate. Someone would be living there, they'd be renting that as their, full-time residence. And then activities would only happen on the barn parcel, which is much smaller. Have you, I guess, I'm curious, have you considered where you would have 30 people park if you only are going to be keeping that back parcel for your activities eventually? Where would those people park?
Yeah, so, my response there is one of, if people are coming overnight, then a lot of times they'll need to get a ride because a spouse or someone else is going to have their stuff. So we did do a configuration for 12 parking spaces on site if we needed to be able to do that. And so I think that it would seem very reasonable to me to create an upward threshold of what anyone would expect to have for a maximum number of spaces used beyond the perimeter of the property for a 5-day residential something. So I guess that my answer to you is we're clear about where we could get 12 cars. And then when you add the perimeter of the property, we're clear about where we could add some additional cars. Again, I have a hard time. It seems reasonable to anticipate the possibility of more cars like that, but I also think so. I also feel like it would be very reasonable to create an upper threshold to limit that. And I don't know what that number is, but I would say that we feel very comfortable with that because I think I just don't anticipate it, and so I don't think it would cause any of us problems to establish some kind of threshold there and call it good.
And just to clarify, those 12 spots that you feel confident you could acquire in that space, that's utilizing just that back parcel that the barn is on?
The bulk of the driveway that's paved is on that parcel. I don't know exactly where the splitting line is, but so someone would be renting that, understanding that there's going to be meditation center activities happening there. Like that's that, you know, so in the same way that the folks who are current residents on Floss Street and would be residents here would understand that this is part of what's going on. Do you know what I mean? And so they, in the same way that if you live across a school, you'd have to know that's going on. And so,
So would parking then occur on the parcel with the dwelling for activities that are occurring in the barn?
Probably.
If a totally separate resident is living in that house?
Probably, yeah, yes.
That's where most of your parking, based on how I've looked at it in the aerial and the lot lines, I think the majority of your current parking is on that parcel with the residents. So that's what makes sense to me. So I just wanted to clarify on that. I'm trying to be very cognizant of the comments that we have received from the public to try to understand those aspects that may occur, wanting to understand the full potential future impact. I think it's just something to consider. Would be parking and the your ability to access the parking that's on that parcel, on the residential parcel. Okay.
I will say in our pre-application meetings, what I understood that the issue it was less about is what's the minimum number of spaces available, and it was more a concern about the maximum number of spaces. Anyway, I didn't understand at all that there was to be a minimum number of spaces. But I may have understood that incorrectly.
I think the goal with understanding how much parking is going to be occurring on public streets is that's where we look at the applicability of the community service use, how much it's going to potentially impact the community.
Yeah.
One of the things we want to think about is, how 30 individual cars parking in that one area would be quite a bit of cars. So understanding where you plan to get your parking, I think is helpful. The city does not have a requirement for parking, so it is not a standard that we are asking you for a minimum number or maximum number. It's more trying to understand how it could change the character of the neighborhood. And that's, sticking specifically to the criteria, trying to understand how it could affect the character of the neighborhood, which is why I asked that question. All right. Well, with that, let's see.
Chair, I have a couple questions, if I may.
Certainly.
How many retreats are planned to be offered a year, or how many are offered currently?
We currently do 2, one 5-day and one 8-day, and I tried to be as clear as I could here. We would not extend beyond 20 days in any event at any point.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And are participants coming and going during that time period, or are they, once they're on the property, they're there on the property until the end of that time period?
Once they're there, they're there. If there's a medical issue, and it's not just as extreme as that, if we forgot to plan and add enough food, somebody would go. But the idea really is to come and to stay and remain. And so we're not having coming and going at weird hours of the day, and we're not doing lots of extra traffic that's happening during that period of time.
Okay. And do you have any recommendation to your participants on travel as far as, where to park or using public transportation? Do you have any sort of guidance that you offer your participants today on that? Yes. And honestly, our guidance is walk and ride your bike. It's our sense that that's the best thing for the planet. And to the extent that people need to drive, then that's happening too. And when we're doing that, we're saying, please, right now at Floss Street, park on the perimeter of Arden-Walled School, because that's where you're not parking in front of people's houses. Some people are concerned about that, and that is very explicit guidance to folks. Mm-hmm. And do you have a feel for what that mix is with your participants today? How many, what percent are driving versus walking, public transit, biking?
We do have some people that come from out of town. So we have a couple people that come down from Olympia. So of course they bring a car. We might have some people that come from Eugene or Ashland, but again, they're not, coming every time. And then we have some people get dropped off.
Okay. So I guess, can you give me, like, is there a percentage roughly that you can share?
So we're talking about the upper limit of 30. I think the most we've ever had for one of our retreats is 12. A couple of those people flew in and were carpooled in. A few people came from Olympia, et cetera. A few of us come from other places and bring our cars. I'd say the most cars we've had down there is maybe 6 or 7, and 3 can park in front of the place, and a few can park on whatever that street is, 42nd, I guess. No, not 42nd, 30, anyway, at the end of Ardenwald, right where Floss dead ends into, yeah.
When we're doing retreats and folks, there's the residential portion, I'd say that it's about 50% of the people probably have cars. So that's why I'm saying it feels like we'd have a maximum of 15. I just don't see it being beyond that. And that's where I'm saying I'm comfortable with that threshold. I think that it's probably closer to 2/3 of folks who might drive on a weekday or on a Sunday, because you've got more locals who are, who that may be how they end up doing it. And so I suppose that, that could get up to 20, but I really this is where so I'm very comfortable with maximum thresholds there as well, because I have a hard time seeing on a Wednesday evening or a Monday evening getting any more than 12 people, even if we were to, grow to our wildest dreams, right? So if we want to establish those kinds of thresholds, I feel very comfortable with that.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any additional questions from commissioners for the applicants? Okay,
Can I?
moving.
Could I just make a couple comments? Is that all right or not?
I believe we can entertain that if someone from the city can confirm.
Yeah, I think this is, still the applicant time, so sure.
Okay.
So I'd just like to share a little bit about the excitement we feel about this property. For one thing, it's been great to be in Milwaukie on Floss Street, and we feel really comfortable here. I think I first saw the property in late November, and you need to know that Andrew was looking at all kinds of weird places that I thought, oh, these are not Zendo places, okay? That's just, anyway, that's between the two of us. But anyway, one night on a Wednesday night, he said, I want to show you something. And so he took me to that property. And it was dark, and there was one little floodlight there. And I immediately fell in love with this property. The property is so beautiful, right? The trees, it's old, it's secluded, that hedge on Roswell. I used to drive from Montevilla, and I never knew there was a house there, just because when I turned that corner, I just see that hedge. So I'm like, oh, there's a house in there? Anyway, so we were very excited. And then we had to meet to see if our membership would support us making an offer on this property. Okay, so I'm the moderator, I run those meetings. We have to have agreement. So Andrew presented the idea. I shared some of my enthusiasm, but I had to tamp it down a little bit. But I've never seen our group. We had, I think, 10 or 12 people at that business meeting, some in person and some on Zoom. I've never seen our group get so excited about the opportunity for us to grow and have our own place. And we had a very exciting discussion and a kind of unanimous vote for Andrew to go ahead and consider making an offer on that property. And since then, everybody wants to see it and whatever. So, and we've done some work over there. We've done a lot of yard work, et cetera. So I just want you to know that we are really excited about what we might be able to bring to this community, just in terms of the presence of our Zen practice and how we can become, very vibrant people in your community. So just wanted to add that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so moving on to additional testimony. Is anyone present, either in person or online, who would like to provide testimony, either in favor, against, or neutral?
Chair, there are some folks in the audience. Do we have you filled out speaker cards so that?
Yeah, you can come on up and fill that in, and we'll just grab that from you at some point. Here. Yeah, so just come up to wherever you want to sit, turn on the mic, you'll see the red light go on, and just, state your name, city of residence, and have at it.
And one additional question, since there are members of the public, are there any representatives from the Neighborhood District Association here to testify?
It doesn't appear that there are, no.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Hi. Hey. My name is Alexandra Howard, and I live at 8802 Southeast 41st Avenue, so down the street from the potential site. So first of all, I start with, it's been very nice to meet you guys, and I appreciate the use and I appreciate their attention with this facility. Like, I'm not opposed to that in general, but I do think that, this is a use that requires a hearing, and it's a conditional use, and that means that setting it up requires careful consideration. So I highlighted a few of my concerns in a letter that I submitted, this evening. I got a little off schedule, so a variety of issues. And my concerns are really focused on the activity level. So we've talked about the number of participants that will spend the night. I'm concerned about the access, so I think we should talk about that, like looking at accessing the site from Roswell 42nd, impacts on 41st Avenue. The street is not designed or set up to handle significant amounts of traffic. If there were sidewalks and curbs and gutters, which would be great, this would be a different conversation, I think, in terms of access. So I think that this use requires some thought about where do the participants park who are coming to these recurring events in the evenings, and where do they park when they're here for extended stays. Extended stays in the neighborhood of more than a dozen people is a significant change. And so it does require, I think, some thought about how we strike a balance in the neighborhood between this use and just sort of living in the area and using the facilities. And then a couple other things in addition to what I wrote on here. So I included some potential ideas for conditions, additional information about how parking will be managed, I think would be quite useful for your consideration. So I've added those in here so you can refer to that. I don't want to read this at all. A couple things that came up though in the conversation that I thought should also be brought up, one around parking. There is not street parking on 42nd. There's a loading zone on Roswell next to the site. So the de facto parking would be on 41st Avenue most likely, and perhaps farther down Roswell, but parking is on one side of Roswell, something to think about. And then the other one is about the rear tax lot, and if that could be divided from the primary use, and if that is, does the community service use continue? So if the tax lot with the barn is sold, right, it's a separate tax lot, does the community service use continue, and would that then be operated by somebody else and they wouldn't have access to the site? So is there a way to tie the uses together on the property? That was something that I was curious about, because I thought when I first looked at this that there was something about formalizing the non-conforming use as the primary use on the rear lot. I didn't see that when I looked again today. Sorry, there's been a big gap since my review. So again, my issues are in here: activity levels, site access, parking, making sure that if the use is permitted, that there are upper standards put in on the number of uses. There could be an opportunity for conditioning it as it is now, and then returning later if the use does want to expand and looking at it again under different conditions. Or there could be setting some limits, and if we set some limits for the higher uses, then I think we really ought to look at the parking and the access plan and really consider how that functions over time. I think that's everything. And you have
So with
the record.
Thank you very much. And just real quickly, since we have a pause in your speaking, there was one line that I had neglected to start to say before you began speaking that I didn't want to stop you.
Sorry.
So just real quickly, we are now recognizing those persons submitting public testimony. If you're here to testify, please remember to confine your remarks to the application and the relevant criteria and to avoid repetition and information that is not relevant. And I should have asked you also to please state your name and city of residence. I believe you're a neighbor to the property, so you are a resident of Milwaukie, I believe.
Correct. I'm a resident of Milwaukie.
Thank you. My apologies for providing that note
Sure.
afterwards, and thank you for your testimony.
Thank you. Sorry I jumped ahead.
No worries. Do any commissioners have a question for the speaker? This might be a question for the city staff. Do we ask questions of the individual speakers now, or should we wait until we have any additional speakers who want to talk first?
Sorry, can you say that again?
Chair Gray.
Should we, if we have questions for the speaker, should we ask them directly to these speakers now, or should we wait to see, or wait to get any other testimony from other folks who are there live first before we ask questions? Or do we ask questions of each person as they come up?
Chair Graytrick, this is Commissioner Sherman. I think it's probably 6-1, half dozen the other in terms of your preference on that. I think we would probably want to stay in the same category of speakers, so asking questions of people who are in opposition and keeping those together, and people who are neutral. I don't know if City Attorney has any thoughts on this.
Well, I was just going to say this is the time for testimony for the record, and typically we don't have a back and forth between the Planning Commission and folks testifying other than clarifying questions, perhaps. If that's the case, I think it would probably be better to have clarifying questions of the person giving the testimony at the time rather than calling them back.
Agreed.
So if you have clarifying questions for Ms. Howard, or if anybody on the commission has clarifying questions for Ms. Howard, I think. If not, then we can move on to the next.
Agreed. Thank you for clarifying. I wanted to make sure I had that understood in the verbiage. So if there are unless there are any clarifying questions from the commissioners, we can now hear from the next person who would like to provide testimony.
Hi, my name is James McGaha, a resident of Milwaukie. I live on 8733 Southeast 41st. I've never done this before, so I'm a little nervous. I share Alex's concerns about parking, and I guess the feeling that I have during all of this is there seems to be a lot of gray area, we don't know what's going to happen. I guess my biggest question is in regards to accountability. So if numbers do hit 30, which is awesome for you guys and great for the community and meditation, what does that look like as far as enforcement of parking? A previous speaker talked about 41st is not set up for 12 cars. It's barely set up for the residence itself, maybe a couple guests. And then Roswell is a throughway for bikers, runners, walkers. 41st does not have sidewalks or it tends to be a shortcut. People skipping 42nd on their way home. So there's a lot of activity, and when I think of just the impact that all those cars would have, which is it's concerning in a safety matter too, because it is by a school, and there's families and there's kids, and so I don't know. That's my concern.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any clarifying questions from anyone? No. Okay, are there any additional folks who would like to speak?
Doesn't look like it, Chair.
Okay. Okay, so now it's time for staff response to the testimony. Are there any responses to the testimony from staff?
Yeah, I want to respond to a couple of questions and points that were brought up. Kind of to get back, I promised Julie I would come back to the short-term rental question. And I think to some degree, both that aspect and some aspects of the parking question, I think in a way it's helpful to think about this proposed use as not unlike like a church campus where there's a place for worship, and sometimes they have a rectory or someplace where, the minister lives or, visiting people live. It's not entirely the same thing, but I especially with thinking about the short-term rental aspect, I think part of the idea is that what's being proposed is like a whole use, right? And part of this particular use involves overnight stays with the retreats. And so I suppose the nuance of having someone who's a permanent residence at the house, I don't think is unlike there being, for example, a minister who lives in the rectory and visiting worshipers or visiting other ministers may stay or something. I think we wouldn't necessarily split hairs about the funding piece of that. Like, who are they paying? Do they pay to come stay at the church during their visit at the church, that kind of thing. So I think it's more helpful to think about that's part of the operation. Is it involves people staying sometimes for a few nights. We're saying up to no more than 20 per year, for example. What I was trying to say earlier was that it might get a little more complicated, but I think this would still be a helpful model to look at it. If there is more separation, like was expressed, that in the future, after renovation of the barn, when the barn were to become the focus of the activity and the house were to be occupied by someone who didn't really have anything to do with the practice, if the house was still being used through an arrangement and the meditation group was paying, was letting the house charge for people to stay, that then maybe we would look at that aspect as short-term rental, but I think it still might be fair to consider it. It's just overall part of the operation and the details of who's living, what their relationship is to the group, whether people are being charged for the few nights they're staying there. I think it's a good question that I clearly hadn't thought about, and I'm still kind of making it up on the fly here. But I think in terms of trying to come to some sense of understanding of it myself, I do feel like it's more appropriate to consider it like almost like a church campus that may have a place where someone's living, and sometimes people are staying overnight there. And the details of who's paying for what, I'm not sure it really rises to the level of short-term rental. The parking aspect is I feel like is a little more complicated to talk about now than it was a few years ago, with changes in state law where we are not allowed to require parking for most uses. And I think it's especially tricky when we are in these conditional use types of reviews. And we still have some back and forth on this. Internally, I think even just trying to make sure we're clear, understand like where the limits are, because it does seem on the one hand fair to think about a use that isn't permitted outright in a zone that may have some impact with respect to parking and our ability to require as a condition that they provide parking. The indications that we've gotten are that even in those circumstances, we're not really able to do that directly. This question came up with respect to the high school. If you remember a few years ago, they were asking to be released from a condition related to having to provide a transportation demand management plan. And the reason that they had been asked to, or required to provide a TDM was because of parking impacts or concerns about parking impacts in an era where we could require parking and there were ratios and requirements for off-street parking for those uses. They came back to us after those requirements were gone, and that was part of the discussion, I guess, was there a need to have them continue to provide that kind of transportation demand management or traffic demand management. And I think, so it's clearly still a fair question for this use. And I'm not sure what the right answer or what all the possible answers might be. I would say that it's certainly fair to consider the condition of some of the surrounding streets and to note that 41st is different than 42nd and different from Roswell. I think I just want to emphasize as well that where on-street parking is allowed, people are allowed to park there. I also think that it's fair to consider that when someone is asking for a conditional type approval for their use that might impact that parking, for us to think about, is there some need to find a way to manage it? So I'm not sure that's really clarifying, except it's just some of what I'm thinking about as I'm hearing this, in terms of wondering about the appropriateness of trying to come up with some kind of a condition related to parking when we can't require it as directly as we used to be able to. And I think being clear about noting where parking is physically possible and where it is not is, I think, in a way, as much of a concern for the applicant as, well, it's not the same concern, but it is a concern for the applicant as well as the people who live in the neighborhood, because it impacts how far people are having to walk from their parked car to the use, which might impact their desire to go to the site. And obviously, everyone likes to have parking in front of their house and doesn't like it when a use, especially one that might have gotten conditional approval, might be impacting that. So that's my speculative rambling about that, but just kind of as things I was thinking about as we were talking about this. So I don't know that a transportation demand management kind of condition is appropriate for this, but I think once you get into deliberation, I think that'll be interesting to think about. And I think wanting to address James's question about enforcement and accountability, that's a good question. And I think that with these community service uses, we are usually, there is a mechanism for the city to respond if there is an indication that something is not functioning the way it was proposed and approved. And for better or worse, because we're not everywhere at one time and we don't live in the places you live in and would have your kind of the first points of contact and impact, we do depend a little bit on, or more than a little bit, on hearing from people about it. So if we were to become aware that it seemed like levels of use at an approved meditation center were over what we had all understood to be proposed, then the city would step in and decide, what type of process might be needed to revisit that. If there are questions about people just parking illegally in places where they shouldn't be, in a loading zone during times when you're not supposed to park there, then I think we defer more to like the police non-emergency contact number and get after parking enforcement that way. So I hope that helps explain a little bit, at least that question of accountability and enforcement. I mean, the idea with trying to be clear about what's being approved when these kinds of things are proposed is so that everyone understands, to some degree, with some flexibility perhaps, but to some degree where the boundaries are and when something's exceeding what it was approved for. I think that's what I've got for now.
Thank you. Thank you, Brett. Okay, so now it's time for any additional questions from the commission. Does any member of the Planning Commission have questions regarding testimony up to this point?
Chair Graytrick, I have some questions for staff.
Please.
Great. So Brett, what is the base zone at this property? I'm sure it's in the application, but you probably also know it.
It's RMD, the moderate density residential zone.
And what are the required minimum parking requirements for residences in the RMD?
There are none anymore.
Okay. And then I was looking through the approval criteria for the community service use, which is 19904.8. Are there any parking requirements in that set of code or approval criteria?
No, because of the changes kind of that trickle down from the state level, there are, and local community decisions, there are no minimum parking requirements.
Okay. I think those were kind of my main clarifying questions kind of at the moment. Thanks.
Thank you. And now it's time for applicant rebuttal. As desired, does the applicant have any rebuttal or any additional comments in response to any of the other testimony that has been provided? If not, we will close the public testimony portion of this hearing.
There are no comments.
Okay. So we will close the public hearing. The public testimony portion of the hearing on the request to establish a community service use at 8835 Southeast 42nd Avenue, file CSU-2025-002 is now closed. Is the commission ready for discussion? And would anyone like to start us off?
I'll jump in and take the lead. Really appreciate staff and the work on this. It feels like, I know it hasn't been kind of cut and dry necessarily, but I do think that I kind of personally agree with what you were saying, Brett, about thinking about this kind of first and foremost through that kind of religious institution lens. I think that helps me kind of answer very clearly that this is also not a short-term rental. You know, that the kind of the primary nature and focus of this community service use would be those religious purposes. And in some ways, I'm kind of personally seeing even the retreats as like a secondary or a tertiary thing. I mean, it really seems like the primary meetings on Sunday mornings and Wednesday evenings are kind of the main focus. I think as I've kind of looked through this, and this was part of my clarifying questions for you, I feel like the approval criteria are met. And I also understand community members and the challenges that we're kind of faced with here on the parking issue. It's unfortunate that in situations like this, I don't think we're able to necessarily require parking. I think one thing that I would be interested in, and I don't think it's something that Planning Commission really has much authority over, but I would like to note it for staff, is that I was noticing that the loading zone on Roswell is currently signed for 7 a.m. to 6 p.m., which frankly is probably overkill. Like the beer truck and the Doritos truck could probably make their deliveries and be out of there by noon, and then it could become regular parking, because that would actually probably provide several additional parking stalls. And so maybe that's something that staff can have a conversation with the city engineer about. And I would also encourage my neighbors to have that same conversation with the city manager or even your elected officials, who will probably be pretty responsive on this. It feels like a time of day kind of approach to that loading zone could work better. But I think that the fact that there is kind of no approval criteria as it relates to parking, which is some of the primary concerns that we're hearing tonight, makes this a little bit hard. I do think most of the other approval criteria are met, and also just want to note that there are also some testimony that we received in support of this as well, both the Llewellyn Neighborhood Association, who I think talked about this, and there was another adjacent neighbor. And so I know these changes are hard. I've got, I think, some changes sitting around the corner for me that sometimes rankled my feathers, especially as we've also eliminated minimum parking requirements. And I also think that you probably, seems like, have some really good neighbors to hopefully work with. And that I think some of this hopefully could be solved through dialogue. I'm seeing some heads nodding. So I'm feeling ready to approve this, and I don't know if I have any other feedback.
Thank you, Commissioner. Just to add on to that, first of all, I would like to thank everyone involved for their time, for city staff, for the applicants, for those involved in this commission meeting. I know that we are, a lot of time went into preparing this and to understanding what the potential impacts would be. And I appreciate the time that was taken to try to visualize something that perhaps isn't, fully to fruition yet. I do have some. I personally, as a member of the city, do have concerns with impacts on parking that I feel are starting to kind of. They start to build, when you remove that sort of restriction, and I do think that it's something that we will consider over time. And as of right now, for the conditions for approval, I don't think it would be appropriate to require conditions on parking. I agree. There is nothing in the language of the criteria where we could speak to a need to develop more off-street parking. And without that, it's really just looking at it from a perspective of what's, how would the use of the neighborhood change? And it doesn't sound like there really would be a dramatic difference from what is being experienced now, personally. So I'm not seeing anything beyond impacts to the actual community. I don't see being great enough to not approve. I think it's really important that, because there is some gray here, that there does continue to be dialogue between members of the community and the property owners. I highly recommend that. I think that will allow everyone to feel like they're being heard and hopefully create a good experience for everyone involved. I would implore the property owners to consider that as they continue to make plans about the property, as you continue to think about how you would develop the property, to continue to think about how parking would be involved and ways you can, try to encourage folks to take other forms of transit. And that's not because it's a requirement. It's just to be a good neighbor and to try to be considerate of how it's impacting your neighbors. We, as a commission, do not have, I believe, the mandate or authority to require it, but it is a very highly recommended activity. So with that, I also feel comfortable, with outlining the activities that would be occurring. I mean, the actual physical activity sounds like it's going to be very quiet. And I mean, that's a lot of the times when we talk to people who are concerned about things, they're concerned about noise. And I think that's a huge thing to consider here as a huge blessing for, a use that is being promoted that would be very quiet and hopefully have a low impact on the community in that way. So that's something to keep in mind. I also personally was happy to see the desire to reuse a significant historic property, just to find a use for it. It can be hard to find uses for historic properties, particularly if you have a large lot in the back that you could tear down that barn and put in a cottage cluster. I mean, there's other things that could happen in that space. So the idea of an applicant wanting to continue to keep it, wooded and keep it very natural and, really appreciate the historic building, I think is something that is really exciting to see. I'm very happy in general to see the type of use that is being promoted. I think it would be good for the community and good for the building. So I believe I've said enough now. If anybody else would like to speak, I'd love to hear their folks.
Yeah, I'm no longer worried about the short-term rental concerns. I also think that looking at it through the lens of a religious institution, I don't think that it applies in this case. I think it's perfectly reasonable to, especially considering that we're looking at no more than 20 days a year. I think it's perfectly reasonable to have people staying there, even if there is an exchange of money. And as far as parking is concerned, as my peers have stated, I mean, it's not within the power of the Planning Commission to enforce parking minimums or impose conditions surrounding parking. But I would encourage dialogue with your neighbors, as Chair Graycheck indicated. Just going through the staff report, I mean, we also saw that a transportation impact study was not required, quelling some of my concerns. And I see no barriers for me moving forward with this for an approval.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to the community members that showed up. I think that it's so great to see members here. A lot of the times we have an empty room and we're talking to each other, and we've done enough of that probably. And so it's really great to get the feedback from the community, to get the community involved. It's so important to hear both perspectives and different sides of a topic. So thank you for that, and thank you for staff for the preparation here, and to the applicant and for fielding questions and offering your testimony. I'm in favor of approval. Just looking at the criteria, I think it is a very gray topic, right? This community service. Maybe that's something that needs to be reviewed to look at to see how we can make it a little more black and white in the future. I don't think we can do that here, but we can do the best we can with what the staff has put forward. On the transportation topic, just as we have guests coming to our residence for dinner once every now and then, or friends coming over for holidays, whatever it may be, they represent you as a property owner as much as you do living in the house. And so I think the importance is just with communication to your guests and the participants that are coming to your property, ensuring that they are acting in a neighborly way, that they are being, that they're commuting to the site in a way that maybe represents how you would like them to represent, like you stated earlier. So I think that, and just having an open dialogue with your neighbors is very important. Since we don't have a way to really demand that here, I think that's where the community needs to come together and talk with each other there. So that's all I have. Thank you.
I can go. I just want to thank you again for everyone that's participated in the testimony, and thank you staff for the clarification of my question. I feel comfortable. I really don't have much more to add than what the other commissioners have mentioned previously, so I feel comfortable approving. Thank you.
I guess I'll just wrap up by saying thank you guys for coming out and testifying. That's what we like to see. And thank you, staff, for the report. I do agree with there's a lot of gray area here. I tend to go with the worst case scenario. So if there's a potential for 30 people and 30 cars, that's where I think it's going to go in my mind. So I want to be, thinking of the worst case scenario. And obviously 30 cars parked on 41st Street or surrounding areas would be a pretty big impact to, I think, the surrounding neighbors. But obviously we can't, enforce that. There's no minimum parking requirements. So I would have to look past that one. I do agree that the activity on the site would be pretty quiet, obviously. I think the future renovations would be the only thing I would have to be a concern about, as far as if there would be any, that's not maybe relevant at this point, but I would also encourage dialogue with the neighbors and, try to limit the impact if possible on the neighbors. I want to thank you guys again. So thank you.
Chair, maybe one more comment from my side. Just on the conditions of approval, I think the number of participants that are listed in the application, and considering when or if another conditional use should be reviewed, or how we should review this property if the meditation participant numbers grow excessively. I think that maybe we should look at how we consider that in this approval, if we agree to approve. I think that would be appropriate, maybe to set some sort of limit where it's like, okay, within the application criteria, they list this many people. If that threshold is met or exceeded, I don't know how we logistically handle that, but maybe that could be something to consider as maybe a protection, so that we're not looking at 60 participants, potentially 60 vehicles, more disruption to the neighborhood than what is anticipated or described today.
I think we have a proposed condition. Commissioner Hess, would you like to propose some sort of language for that? Or what I'm hearing from you, and please tell me if I'm incorrect, but the application is for up to 30 participants in various events, and I believe also stipulating that there will be no more than 20 overnights per year might be two grounds upon which you might want to propose a condition for that. That then links that condition to the approval itself, rather than digging back into the application to find that. Certainly, if larger numbers are seen by anybody in the neighborhood, by our code enforcement, or if our land use department gets word of a big problem out there, be it by the existence of far more cars than are typically seen at a normal event, typically we go through a process to try to enforce and work that out with the community service use. We also have the ability to bring them back before the body to address those concerns. And so there's a variety of enforcement tools that we work on, starting with the lowest bar, which is, hey, we're hearing that there's a lot more people. But I think the link to those are to enshrine in the conditions of approval something tied to the application. Maximum amounts of people, 30 per event, and the overnight stays. Might be one area I think would be reasonable to consider, but that's for the 7 of you to, or 6 tonight, to you to hash out how you'd like to word that.
Thanks, Commissioner Hess. I think I'd be interested in hearing a discussion on it if others were.
Yeah, this is exactly where my mind was at. You beat me to it. I am comfortable with the condition on exactly those two requirements, on the 20 overnight stays and 30 participants at any given activity. Do any commissioners have different conditions in mind?
I guess.
I think
go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think those are the fairest metrics for us to utilize at this time, since that is what is expected. And neither of them have any direct, connection to the number of parking spots. We're not tracking how many people are parking, but I think it is fair to request, another look at this, or perhaps disapproval if the numbers are far different from what has been proposed.
Maybe just to kind of clarify the retreats. What was my computer died, and I didn't bring a charger. So what was the duration on the retreats?
I think what the applicant stated was, right now with the two they have, one is 5 days and the other is 8 days, I think. So in their narrative, they said 5 to 7, but it sounds like there's been 5 to 8.
Okay. I was just wondering if, 20, I know is a number that's been thrown out, but I was just trying to think about increments of 5 or 8 and how those get to 20 or some other number close to that. That was just from a pure operations perspective.
Yeah, I'm thinking the same way. And maybe I think you said potentially 3 retreats a year. So maybe looking at,
if we looked at 24, that would be 3 8 days, kind of as maybe a max.
I guess
Probably not.
Yeah, would it be fair to bring the applicant
can we have,
up to
if we could have
entertain?
the applicant approach, please.
Thank you. Yeah, there is one time a year when we would do an 8-day, and it's it's an annual thing in the Buddhist calendar. Really, that we were looking at potentially 4 or 5 day retreats, but again, our ability to even consider that in the future is we don't have the people power to be even close to there, which is why it feels like that's on the outside of what it is that we would be doing. So the next thing that we would do, we would have we might add an additional 5 day, and if we were to add then an additional one, then we would be doing 4 or 5 days. And that would be the outside. That's how we get to 20, and we wouldn't be doing the 8 day. We've done anyway, like that.
Seems like 20 is an acceptable kind of outer limit right now. How does that sound to other planning commissioners?
Yeah,
Sounds appropriate.
Yeah, 20 days sounds, I think that was mentioned. So yeah, that's consistent with what we've been thinking of.
It sounds like it leaves room for growth, and if we go beyond that, it sounds like it meets criteria for revisiting.
Okay. And maybe if I could, I want to maybe clarify, just so we're clear from a condition of approval, was we're talking about 30 participants, because there's kind of different kinds of participants talked about here. The regular showing up once a week, the active once a month. It sounds like we're just thinking more about a 30-person head count at a given moment in time. Is that what you're proposing?
Yeah, my only concern or thought would be how many administrative moderators or employees would be on the site assisting those participants if that is outside that 30 limit, as they may also be traveling to the site. And maybe that's something we could ask the applicant, if that's okay.
I'm happy to just stay here if that's helpful. There are no employees, and we don't anticipate having employees, so that would not be an option in terms of our role. We're participants as well as being. So my understanding would be how you're describing that it's bodies with a pulse that are on site. We just did a cleanup on the site. I guess it's possible that I suppose it's like if a bunch of people showed up to like weed or something like that, that it could be more than that. Where we're community people, it didn't even occur to me on something like that. But but we can limit it. We can say, okay, once we get to 30, people go away.
We just say 30 people.
Yeah, I don't think our intent is to limit for a cleanup in that sense. That's maybe very short lived.
Right. A regular expectation of what anything, yeah, and then no employees.
Okay. So I think the proposal then for the condition would be for 30 participants or people on site for any given retreat or activity related to the meditation, and no more than 20 days overnight. Would you agree?
I'm all right with that condition. How do others feel?
Agree. I think that's fair.
I agree as well.
I think one of the benefits, I'm sorry, to that I think would be that it allows for, since we feel confident that we're not within the gray lines of a rental property. I think I feel I'm comfortable with that now, but if some of those numbers were to expand, we may, it may push this into a different type of use, or it may make us need to think about what's happening overnight based on the numbers of people. So I think that's fair. It's not in any way saying that it would not be allowed to go beyond that, but it would require a relook if it wants to go beyond that. To make sure that it's actually still a good fit for that property specifically. I think that's fair.
Brett, just maybe for community members in the audience, so if we were to approve this application with this modified condition of approval being added in, and either community members that the applicant say they're at the threshold, then that would be an opportunity where the applicant would need to come back and ask for new or an updated community service use. Is that kind of what the process would look like? Just want to kind of clarify the process for everyone in the room of how you would change this in the future if you ever needed to.
Right, yeah, no, I think us being notified of some change in level of activity would prompt a look into it to see what needed to happen. In the past, in other situations, sometimes there's been, it's been enough for us to be notified of that, to communicate the concern to the applicant and kind of give them a reminder that this is the level, and they make a correction because they're not interested in moving forward with a modification. And then another option would be, if they were to say, yeah, we've grown more than we expected to, we'd like to talk about raising the limit, whether it's number of overnight days or number of participants at an event. Yes, that could bring them back to you. I think there's a minor modification and as well, which would just be handled administratively. I don't know that we have great examples of what that would be in response to, community complaint. I think the sense or guess would be that if we're hearing significant community complaints, and depending on the reaction of the applicant to that, sharing that information, that I think we're probably thinking about bringing people back to the Planning Commission to revisit. So. And I would just say, it sounded like, I think Commissioner Pinnock was starting to maybe emphasize or highlight this. I think we will, with a condition that we would develop with your direction, I think we want to specify, we're talking about for the number of overnight events that's in a calendar year. I think I heard you starting to say that, and we'd want to clarify that. And the number of participants at a given kind of event is 30, right?
And I guess maybe just to kind of clarify, are we talking about a religious event, or are we talking about things like people coming together to pull weeds?
I have to think about how to phrase it, but my understanding was based on what's presented. It's kind of the regular events, either in-person meditation sessions or the
kind of religious events,
the retreat events.
It's just characterized. That'll be my simple characterization.
Yeah. I think if we started to hear about more regular cleanup events that were drawing 50 or 60 people to the site, I think that would be grounds to kind of revisit that as well. But, yeah.
Go to the neighbor's house and help them pull some of their weeds. All right.
So at this time then, I believe it would be appropriate for us to phrase the condition that we would like to see for the condition for approval. So I'm happy to take a stab at that verbiage. We would like to, and others please clarify if I've missed anything, we would like to request a condition of approval that would re-examine the approval of the application if the property is found to be servicing more than 30 regular meditation participants, or if participants would be staying overnight on site for more than 20 days during a calendar year.
I would agree with that, unless it's an and/or situation where it's, both of those are applicable. But in general, I think, yeah, Chair, I like the language.
I guess, Chair Graytrick, I just would want to clarify, maybe with Justin, the initial verbiage you were proposing about like revisiting the application. I don't think we're not voiding the application if one of those metrics were ever met. I think what we're saying is that is kind of the limit. And if they wanted to go beyond that, that's going to take a new type 3 application.
Yeah, that's correct. You would be conditioning their approval on those two terms. Should they exceed those terms, then they fall into our code enforcement area if we find out, and they either need to comply with their existing conditional use, or community service use. They either need to comply with their community service use approval, seek modification of it, or if they continue to violate it, they could be subject of having it revoked. So that's just a long way of saying there are enforcement tools here for us, but we don't need to put in the condition, the idea that we would revisit it. The approval is just conditioned on those two numerical limitations.
Understood. Do you need any additional verbiage then from us as a commission? Okay.
I don't think so. I think we have enough. And if we take a vote and roll call the vote, when we call the vote, it should be as amended on the record, the conditions of approval.
Okay. Well, with that, if there is no further discussion from the commission, I will entertain a motion.
Yeah, I'd like to move to approve case file CSU-2025-002 as amended with a new condition of approval that no more than 30 people participate in kind of a religious or meditation event, and no more than 20 night overnight events in a calendar year.
My second.
All right. All those in favor of approving application CSU 2005-002 will, as their names are called, answer aye. And opposed, answer nay. I'm sorry, I hadn't seen how that was written before. Okay, let me go in order here. Okay. Commissioner Garvey.
Aye.
Commissioner Pennick.
Aye.
Commissioner Sherman.
Aye.
And I need to pull, I'm so sorry, I don't have everyone's last name right in front of me.
Hess and Lowther.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Oh, I was trying to help you out. We have Commissioner Hess and Lowther
Thank you.
left.
Commissioner Hess?
Aye.
Commissioner Lowther?
Aye.
Thank you. All right, and myself, aye. Application CSU-2025-002 is approved as amended. Gavel. If anyone wishes to appeal the commission's decision to the city council, you must make an application stating the grounds for your appeal within 15 days of the mailing of the notice of decision. Please see planning staff if you have questions. All right, at this point in the agenda, the commission will act as the Community Involvement Advisory Committee. Does anyone, including audience members, have any items to report? All right. With that, do commissioners have any additional items for discussion?
Maybe just a quick one, and I don't know who received this because it came as a BCC, so I'll send it to Laura to maybe pass back out. But the League of Oregon Cities sent out a note at 5 o'clock tonight talking about a municipal fundamentals training in Salem that's occurring in a few weeks from now, end of July. But one of the interesting things in this, they were talking about some recent changes in state law require that members of governing bodies of public bodies with expenditures for fiscal year of $1 million or more must attend a certified public meetings law course, and that this course meets those requirements. It also sounds like there will be some Zoom courses as well, but anyways, I'll distribute that out because, again, don't know who received it, but wanted to at least flag it for other planning commissioners. Looks like aside from public meetings, they'll also be talking about home rule and lobbying and land use. So could be of interest to any of the city planning nerds who often sit up here on the dais.
Oh, thank you for that. And with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Chair Graytrick, if I could, a couple of
Oh,
things.
I'm sorry.
No, you're.
Yes, please.
Fine.
I mean-
No, that's okay. Forecast for future meetings. I think folks probably received an email today from Petra, our wonderkin administrative assistant, that our July 8th meeting's been canceled. We do have public hearing regarding the Affordable Housing Code Amendments on July 22nd, and tentatively the Middle Housing Land Division Code Amendments on August 12th. So we're going a little ways out, but those are a couple things that are on the agendas coming up. And since I have the microphone, I just wanted to share an invitation. The developer of the cottage cluster at 4103 Southeast Olson Street is hosting an open house for whomever would like to come on July 1st from 11 to 1. So if you'd like to pop over, I know it's smack in the middle of the day, but if folks have time to go by, they're nearly finished. So by next week, they'll be ready to go. It is an ownership project, so it'll be a condominium development. And it's looking pretty great. So, everyone, welcome to come by and take a look at our second completed cottage cluster in the city. That's all I have. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. All right, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
I second.
All right. Then we are adjourned.
All those in
Have a
favor?
good night.
Thank you, Chair.
Night, everyone.